Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There's still people entering. You want to wait for a few minutes or shall we start? Mr. Rao says I should start, so I'll start. In these chapters, which we are going to consider over this weekend, Krishnaji essentially explains how the ego manifests in our consciousness behind many noble ideas and noble thoughts, so-called noble, because that's what society says, that's what most of our religions have said. And he points out that it's not just the aim of the ego or the desire which matters, but the very process of the ego or the process of desire creates a lot of problems and division and antagonism. Normally in society, we think you must have noble aims, you must have noble desires, avoid ignoble desires, and so on. So if you are desiring to be religious or you are desiring to believe in God and so on, or you create some ideal like the Marxist ideal for society and so on, then in working towards it, we consider that is very good action, right action. But Krishnaji begs to differ. He says, so long as it is a desire process, it is an ambitious process of achieving success, it will have certain consequences. It will produce conflict between what is and what should be. So it brings us into this corridor of opposites. If you have fear, you want to cultivate courage. If you are idle, lazy, you want to cultivate discipline to overcome that. If you are violent, you imagine a state of non-violence and you try to practice that state. You can multiply these examples. There is what is, namely the fact, and the mind creates an opposite of it as an ideal and uses will to go in that direction. So there is a conflict between what is and what should be. And you use your will to overcome that conflict. All this strengthens the me, the actor, who is achieving that. And he points out that the me, the actor, is the problem, not the aim of the actor. That's a mistake, that's an illusion. Now, why does he say that? We must understand that. And I would like to explain it the way I have understood through my own investigations, which are not the same as what Krishnaji says. So take it with a pinch of salt. We should take it with a pinch of salt, even what Krishnaji says, because he says, don't accept what I say, investigate it. And that's what we are trying to do. That is true not only for Krishnaji's statements, but for any statement. before you accept it, before you consider that to be true, you must investigate in detail. Otherwise, you have a blind acceptance of authority, and that's not self-knowledge. That becomes an illusion. It may be false in the sense it's not part of nature, or it's a false notion. And I don't know that. I have accepted it on the basis of the authority of the speaker. And so it becomes true for me. So when it is not true, but it becomes true for me, that's what constitutes illusion. That's what we said. And such illusions create disorder in our consciousness. We went into that earlier. And self-knowledge is for freeing oneself of this process of creating illusions. The ego itself being a major illusion, in the sense that it is created by our thought. It's not there in nature. Nowhere in the universe do you find the ego, not even in animals. There may be some in higher animals, I don't know. But unless one has the capacity for memory, for imagination and thinking, it does not constitute the ego. You cannot constitute the ego. But we have, the human consciousness is bestowed by these capacities. Therefore, almost every human being ends up creating the ego and then following the consequences. And we need to free ourselves of this process. And that's what self-knowledge is for. So let us investigate that to some extent. If you have an ideal which you want to achieve, it means you are not satisfied with the present state of things. So you want to change it, and you have an imaginary ideal towards which you want to progress. So it strengthens the me, which is the actor, who is trying to go from what is towards what should be, namely the ideal. The ideal is fictitious. It is imaginary. It is not actually there in your consciousness. The opposite of that is in the consciousness. So we create an opposite, and then we come into this so-called corridor of the opposites, like fear, courage, violence, non-violence, laziness, discipline, and so on. And that's a process of conflict. It brings conflict into our consciousness. So Krishna says that's an illusory process. We think that by doing this, we will improve ourselves, change ourselves, and we will progress towards the ideal. And he says that's an illusion, it's a mirage. It doesn't happen that way. Let us understand that. Why is that true? Neither accepting what he says, nor rejecting what he says. Now, all of us, psychologically, and perhaps also materially, are standing at a line on one side of which are all the pleasures we have access to. And beyond the line are the qualities and the pleasures you want to acquire. because you are dissatisfied with what you have. That seems to be the common lot of human beings, irrespective of how much they have. The poor man may be desiring to buy a bicycle or a scooter, and the rich man is desiring to buy a Mercedes or an airplane. But desire is common to both the people. The Queen of England may be desiring a new palace. Somebody may be desiring to have a son. The unmarried man is desiring to get married, and he thinks thereby he will become happy. The unmarried man wants to feel stifled and wants to get out of his situation. And so he makes efforts to either cheat or get a divorce and so on. In all these cases, there is what is, which is on this side of the line, which also applies to things like anger or jealousy and so on. That may be what you are living with, or conflict. And you imagine a state of non-jealousy or non-anger and non-conflict, freedom from conflict. And then you want to progress from the present state into that state, which is the conflict between what is and what should be. And because you are the doer, it strengthens the doer. And the doer is the self, the me. So it puts emphasis on the self, because it's I who am trying to achieve that state, that ideal. Now, is this true? In the material field, there is some truth to this process. You want to have a garden in your house, you can get a design of a nice garden, make effort to get the tools for creating the garden, put in work, work hard, and you end up creating the garden. That has been our experience. We have learned driving that way. We have learned language that way, and so on. So in that, our experience is that we can create an imaginary ideal and progress towards it through discipline and through will and through effort. We project that into the psychological field, and we feel we can do the same thing in the psychological field. That is, if you have anger, you can go towards a state of non-anger, which is freedom from anger, which is an imagined state. And similarly, from violence to non-violence, from fear to courage, and so on. Krishna says this is an escape from what is. You're not facing what is, you're not trying to understand the cause which is creating the what is. All that is part of what is. So you're not studying what is in your consciousness. You are imagining a fictitious state and moving towards that fictitious state, thinking that when you have achieved the result, you will be happy. But when you attain one particular quality, or even one particular object of desire, it moves your line a little further and brings that object on this side of the line so that you have access to that. And temporarily you feel fulfilled, you feel very sense of achievement, you feel proud that I wanted this and I got it. by working hard, and so on. That's also a manifestation of the ego. There is the vanity and the pride in achievement. But then you are again standing at a line, and there are still other things on the other side of the line. And therefore, psychologically, you are in the same state. Momentarily, you are satisfied, having achieved a result which you desired. But having desired it, the energy which was coming from the desire disappears. And so there is a state of low energy, what we call stagnation or boredom, until a new desire is born. And that new desire energizes you again into activity. So life becomes continuously trapped in this vicious cycle of dissatisfaction, imagining an ideal which removes that dissatisfaction, making effort, progressing towards it, to progress towards it. Either you fulfill or you are not able to fulfill. If you are not able to fulfill, you experience frustration, which is also a form of conflict. Or you are able to fulfill, then you feel a sense of satisfaction, and temporarily you are at peace, but the peace is disturbed for the same reason originally that peace was disturbed, because a new desire is born. And that again, this whole process repeats it. That is the vicious cycle of the ego process. So what Krishna is talking about is whether one can approach life completely differently. Not in this way, not out of desire. Because this is the ego process. Are we capable of that? Do we have the energy of acting without the ego? And you will find that yes, we do. In many hobbies, we don't have any aim of achievement. We do it just for the joy of it. You go and meet a friend, not because you want something from him, but because it's a joy to meet, to share life with him. Or you go for a walk and you enjoy the sights of the trees and the river and the birds and all that. There is no problem in experiencing that joy. But when you want to maximize that joy, when you want to ensure that you get that joy every day, then the ideal, the actor is born. So if there is an end in view in your action, it becomes egoistic. If there is no end in view, if you are just enjoying the process, namely the walk or the game or the friendship or relationship, then there is no ego in it. So that's what it means that our own thinking creates the ego. Otherwise, there is no ego in nature, and we are also born in nature. We have no ego. The ego is not there like your lungs or stomach or hands or any part of your body which is created by nature. It's something that arises in the manner in which one is approaching. But if we consider it to be noble, we don't understand this whole process and the danger of this process, then we put up with the conflict, we think it is part of life, and we keep struggling. And life becomes one continuous struggle, solution of one problem after another. And Krishna says, life is not a problem to be solved. It's it's a mystery to be understood. So it's just our approach which is creating all this. Now, there are many beliefs which are considered very noble. Belief in God is considered very noble. And being an atheist is considered stupid. Why does one believe in God? If you examine that, you will find that it helps you to face fear. Belief helps you to overcome fear, which doesn't remove the causation of the fear, but it helps you to escape from the fear. So belief in nationalism, belief in an ideal, belief in religion, belief in God, gives you a sense of security that there is a higher individual or higher power there which is protecting me, protecting all of us. And so belief in reincarnation is also like that. Your fear of death decreases because you think I am going to live again after death. May be true, may not be true, you don't know that, but you believe. When you know something is true, you don't have to believe it. So you believe when you don't know it is true, because it suits you, it gives you comfort. So it's an ego process. You are still looking for comfort, you are looking for escaping from the difficulties of life and so on, which is quite a different process from understanding life. If you experience boredom, as most of us do, we look to entertainment. The entire entertainment industry has come up and makes lots of profits because they know that human beings are bored and they look for entertainment and for pleasure in order to escape from that boredom. But what is the cause of boredom? Why is one bored? Isn't it a form of insensitivity? And how does that insensitivity come about? Unless you understand that and you you dissolve the cause, you're not living rightly. You're merely escaping from the problem temporarily, and it will recur again and again. We object to the drunkard because he gets addicted to the bottle, and without it, he feels miserable or unhappy. And it eventually spoils his health. But we are not very different from that addict. We are also addicted to all these achievements and fulfillments and means of overcoming boredom. And we think that they are not bad for our health, so it's all right to do that. And Krishna is pointing out that all addiction is bad for the mind and the body. When you are approaching life egoistically, you're basically approaching life like a beggar, asking for something in every activity for yourself, in every relationship, something for yourself. All the time, the emphasis is on receiving profit or gratification, either material or psychological. Psychological meaning name, fame, approval, praise, and so on, which is the opposite of criticism, disagreement, and so on. So it divides our relationships into friends and enemies. Those who support us, who agree with us, who suit us, are friends. Those who don't agree with us, don't support us, oppose us, are enemies. Not enemies in the sense you may not want to kill them, but you dislike them, you hate them. We are very concerned with the manifestation of that hate, but Krishnaji is saying that hate in your consciousness is already violence. It doesn't become violence only when you pick up a stick and beat the other person. The fact that you are hating that person is already a problem, already disorder in consciousness. And virtue is order in consciousness. So he goes much deeper into all this causation, which we experience in our daily life. And it begins with this approach of ours, because we have identified ourselves with a country, a religion, this body, our family, and so on, creating the so-called me and the mind and the other, who's beyond the me and the mind. That's a division between the me and the mind and the other. And this attachment to the me and the mind is what we call the ego. So tomorrow we will go into it as to what is the process by which this ego forms, because a child is born without an ego. It's part of nature. In nature, there is no ego. So how come almost every human being, as he grows up, ends up acquiring this ego process? Is it something that is biologically required? And do we need to free ourselves of this process at some point? There is some part which is natural, which is instinctive, which has been put there by nature, like the desire for pleasure and the avoidance of pain. It's put there by nature for your own security. If you didn't have that, you would get into danger and kill yourself. So for our protection, it has been put there. Fears are like that too. There is the natural fear, biological fear, and there is the psychological fear which arises because of thinking. There are three major fears which create three egoistic drives within us. And the ego manifests because of that. One is the fear of future insecurity. Therefore, human beings want to possess more and more property, higher and higher safety, and so on, so that never in future will they experience want. That's the future insecurity. They are not facing that insecurity now, but they are imagining a day when you might have the insecurity. Certain amount is factual, because you need to plan your life for your old age and so on. But the mind keeps chewing on it, is obsessed with it, and that obsession is the ego. So it's very subtle. There is a part which is simply the structure. And there is the other part, which is the importance you give to that structure and the attachment or addiction to that structure. Another such basic fear is the fear of loneliness. It drives us into attachments, wanting our relationships to be static, to be always there, so that my parents, my wife is always there, my brother is always there for me. So I want the relationships to be static, which is the desire for attachment or dependence on them. So I depend on my happiness for this immediate family. It overcomes the feeling of loneliness. It also overcomes the feeling of loneliness when you join a church or a caste group and so on. You feel part of the group, you feel that group will help you, and therefore you feel safe and you don't feel lonely. So that's one big drive, but it creates a division between your group and another group, which the other person creates for the same purpose. You are identified with your group and he is identified with his group. He is working for his group and you are working for your group. And when there is a clash between the interests of the two, it results in so-called rioting or war and so on. We are familiar with this process. The third major fear, sustained in the form of the ego, is the fear of being nobody. If I am nobody, people will just walk over me. That's the fear. In order to overcome that fear, there is the drive to acquire power, to acquire position, to acquire money, which is also a form of power, to acquire knowledge, which is also a form of power. So all this is a process of seeking some form of security against those fears. And this whole thing is part of the ego structure. So at the deeper level, we have to investigate whether it's possible to free oneself of these fears. Otherwise, the fears create these drives, and we are trapped in desire and ambition. Ambition is promoted in our education system. Also in society, you must rise in society and so on, they say. You must compete and come above all your colleagues. Now, ambition has its own consequences. It's a major cause of insensitivity. I'll explain the connection between the two. When you are ambitious, going towards an aim, you are utilizing time to go in that direction. And that particular direction becomes terribly important in your consciousness. Therefore, you ignore the other directions. You're not interested in your child. You're not interested in anything that doesn't contribute to your going towards your ambition. So it affects your relationships. You go past a river and you don't care to look at the river because that doesn't take you towards your ambition. So time is being utilized to go in a particular direction, and anything that does not take you in that direction is considered a waste of time. This concept of waste of time is just a creation of thought. And that thought comes from this egoistic, ambitious mind. So there is great danger in ambition and in approaching life with desire. But we are not aware of that danger. Therefore, we keep approaching life that way and seeking to be successful. Krishnaji made a famous statement. He said, success is mediocrity. We normally think success is, the successful people are not mediocre. It's those who are not successful who are mediocre. He's saying the opposite. He's saying the successful man is mediocre. Because he never questioned anything. He accepted this whole structure of society. He climbed every ladder that was put in front of him and went to the top, defeating all his colleagues and so on, which means he never questioned, and that's why he is mediocre. The great minds have been those who have broken away from the past, from the tradition, and brought something into the new into the world. So when you are simply imitating, when you are simply following, obeying the dictates of society, contributing to society as it is, Krishnaji says, to be well adjusted to a sick society is no sign of health. And indeed, it's a sick society with the amount of crime that is happening, with the amount of torture and unhappiness that we are creating. It's a sick society in which we are living. And we want to be famous in that society, to rise above everybody else, contribute to this process. But we are not aware of it. We are trapped in the propaganda of wanting to achieve success. So that's why this inquiry of self-knowledge runs very deep. It is not simply a question of questioning your beliefs and so on, but to inquire into everything, your approach to life, your competitiveness, your arrogance, your anger, your hatred of people who oppose you, and so on. It won't go unless you examine the causation. So what is the causation of boredom? Insensitivity. What causes insensitivity? Ambition, as we said, is one of the causes of insensitivity. Because sensitivity comes through contact, through play. When you are in contact with nature, you will discover the beauty of nature. When you are in contact with music and listening to it, your mind needs to be free, not distracted. Then you will experience the beauty of that music. So we are capable of approaching life non-egoistically and thereby creating sensitivity, experiencing the beauty in every activity in life. But we miss all that beauty, which is the joy that you experience in engaging in that activity. You miss all that because you have a certain ambition, a certain goal to achieve. And society has given tremendous importance to achievement. Look at the rewards they offer to someone who can run or jump a little higher than all other people. It's just a creation, it's a propaganda in the mind. We never question what is so important about that achievement. Is it not important to inquire, are they enjoying their playing? Are they enjoying their jumping? Or does it matter only whether they defeat everybody else and why? So the ego is very pernicious. It hides behind all kinds of noble aims and efforts and so on. And yet, as we said, the ego has its own consequences. You're all the time standing at that line and wanting to push that line forwards. But whichever line you are standing at, the same will happen again. So psychologically, Krishna says, the future is now. If you are looking at across the line with desire, with ambition, with sense of achievement, greed, then you will look at across the line in that way next year and 10 years, all your life, and therefore remain part of that vicious cycle of the ego. So is there an energy that does not come from the ego? And the answer is yes. But we have not given importance to that energy. That's the energy of love. Because Krishna says love is where the self is not, which means the ego is not. When you are not approaching life egoistically, you are doing it just for the joy of it, for the love of it. Whatever that activity or whatever that relationship, you are courting your friend not in order to use him for your purpose, but just to share life because there is joy of sharing together in friendship. So it is the ego that brings corruption into our life. And the ego is not there in nature. It is something we create from our approach, from our thinking, all the time giving importance to the first person singular, wanting name, fame, power, position, security for the me and the mine. So friends, I'm a scientist, so I like equations. So I have made a chart which shows this danger of the ego. I want to share that. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And I hope I am able to do that this time. Are you able to see? I have entitled it The Role of the Ego.
Yes, sir.
Now, the first column on the left is simply what is natural. And see what happens to it when you approach that natural capacity or quality egoistically. Then I have put it on the right-hand side, the result of what happens when you add the ego to it. So love, which is an innate capacity in all of us, when you add the ego to it, it becomes attachment, it becomes possessiveness, and of course, follow the travail of jealousy and so on. Wish, such a normal, natural thing. I wish to have food. I wish to meet my friend. I wish to go for a walk. You add the ego to it, and it turns into desire and addiction. Power, whatever power, whether muscle power or nuclear power or power of knowledge, ability, such a useful thing, ability, add the ego to it, and it is used for selfish purpose. It leads to domination, exploitation of others. Sexuality, something that is naturally there. It's there in plants, it is there in animals, it's there in us. Add the ego to it, and it turns into lust, pornography, rape, and so on. Friendship, such a natural happening. Add the ego to it, and it turns into support, dependence, desire for agreement, groupism, and so on. Humility, which is simply knowing that you do not know. Add the ego to it, and it becomes a feeling of inferiority, being servile. Talent, which everybody possesses in some way or the other. Not only the talent which the society values, but intrinsically the talent which a person has. It may be in dancing, it may be in music, it may be in sports, in whatever activity, or just in being silent. Add the ego to it, and it turns into pride, vanity, a feeling of superiority. Excellence, which is a natural thing to demand excellence of oneself in whatever activity one is engaging in. Add the ego to it, and it turns into competition, comparison, and rivalry. Groups, such an innocent activity. We need to cooperatively work in groups. Hospitals are groups like that. Schools are groups like that. Add the ego to it, and it creates division, nationalism, fundamentalism, and so on. Thinking or thought, so useful. I'm using thought right now to express myself. Add the ego to it, and it becomes worry, fear, anxiety. Pleasure, such a natural thing. You eat food, you get pleasure. You have sex, you get pleasure. You meet a friend, it gives you pleasure. Add the ego to it, and it becomes habit, addiction, boredom. Need, we all have needs. But when you add the ego to it, it turns into greed and covetousness. So you will see that the real culprit is this ego process, not what nature has naturally put into our consciousness or our life. The first column is that, and the second column is what our thinking and our approach creates. So what Krishnaji is saying is, this transformation of consciousness is a totally different way of approaching life. Never approaching it with self-interest or ego for the purpose of achieving for oneself or getting something for oneself. That's a false motivation. And it's a mirage to think that one more achievement will bring in happiness, because as I pointed out, it just moves the line a little bit, and you are psychologically again in the same state. So unless you learn to look across that line differently, not with eyes of greed and covetousness and achievement, but you have to ask yourself this question: why am I dissatisfied with what is? Because we all already have an infinity. If you are in good health, you have an infinity. You will realize that when you fall ill and you are holed up in a hospital for a month, you pray and you say, oh God, just give me the strength to walk on that road again. I don't seek anything else. But when you do have the capacity to walk on the road, you ignore it. You don't value it. So if you value what you have, which is sensitivity, if you give attention to it, you will perceive joy. Blake made a very interesting poem about it. I would like to share that with you. Let me close this. He said, there is a lot of joy in life. Joy is not pleasure. Just see what he says. One who binds to himself a joy, does the winged life destroy. But one who kisses the joy as it flies, lives in eternity's sunrise. That means you experience a joy, and the joy ends after a while. You have no objection to experiencing it. You have no objection to its going away. That means the observer, the ego, is not holding on, not trying to act at all, not interfering. It's natural for a joy to come and for the joy to leave. To be just a witness to that, to go through the experiencing without wanting to hold on to it. If you try to hold on to it, you bring in the ego and possessiveness and so on, and you get caught in this whole cycle. Pleasure, desire, and achievement, and so on, which we have just pointed out. So there have been any number of people before Krishnamurti who have understood this. The Buddha also said, don't get addicted to any pleasure. That's a grave danger. But the problem is not with the pleasure. The problem is in demanding the increase of that pleasure or the possession of that pleasure so that it always remains available to you. That creates the actor. So the structure is not the ego. It is the attachment to the structure which creates the ego. And that comes from our approach, our thinking. We are not aware of this danger. That's why we do it. And so Krishna says, watch it. Watch it so that you become aware of that danger. When you become aware of the danger, you won't go in that direction. Nature has put an intelligence into us which does not let us court danger. If you are tempted to court danger, it's because of the ignorance. That ignorance is the illusion that one more achievement, one more quality, one more object of desire on this side of the line will bring happiness. It won't. It is a mirage. It's an illusion. So friends, I'll end it here and we can discuss it. This whole question of how the ego itself is a problem, not the objective of the ego. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
You're welcome.
So now I will read the first question that we have from Dakshinamurti. Kay says that intelligence is sensitivity to the situation. Can you kindly elaborate on this?
Yes. The way he uses the word intelligence is quite different from what we normally think of intelligence in society, which is simply cleverness or ability at a particular activity, in a particular activity. He's talking of intelligence which enables you to discriminate between the true and the false, which enables you to see the danger in your approach, which enables you to come upon self-knowledge, which is freedom from these illusions. So it is tantamount to wisdom, what we call normally as wisdom. Because there is not much wisdom in a mind that is full of illusions. It's living in a thought world created of its own. It's not living in the real world. So intelligence, as Krishnaji meant, he said, I think somewhere in one of the books, he says, intelligence, there is no intelligence without compassion. Now, compassion and love are part of wisdom. So the way he uses these terms, they all refer to one state, which is the state of freedom. It is also the state of intelligence. It is the state of wisdom, of compassion, of love, which is the religious mind. They are all one and the same. We see them as different because we are not in that state. And we imagine each one of these states. The imagination is not the actuality.
So the next question, sir, ego is common in your table. Except love, are all others part of ego?
What we normally call as love in society is also ego. It is Krishnaji who uses the word love in the sense love is where the self is not. That means there is no self-interest in that activity, then you are approaching it with love. Otherwise, if there is that self-interest, which is the ego, then it's not love. It's a corrupt activity we are engaging in.
Now the second part, also, when ego is there, no others, you mentioned. If others are there, no love?
No, it is not that there are no others. They have their own ego. You have your own ego because you are identified with one fragment, which is your body, your religion, your family, etc. And he is identified with his family, his religion, his country, and so on. So that's what divides us. But this division is simply an accident of birth. It's like two identical IBM computers, one of which is programmed as a Christian, another as a Hindu, another as a communist. And they are identified with their program. They are calling that the me, the I, and therefore they are dividing themselves. In actual fact, they are identical computers with this propaganda in their mind. If they don't identify with it, if they see the falseness of the propaganda, they can free themselves of this process. That's how I understand self-knowledge. But you have to devote yourself to this. It's more difficult than understanding science because there is no method. In science, there is a method. There is a method of experimentation and comparison and all that measurement. None of that is applicable here. So this demands a creative perception which requires the learning mind. The learning mind is a mind that says, I don't know what the truth is. I'm eager to find out. That's the learning mind. But our education makes us feel so proud of what we know. There is a vast unknown beyond that, which we don't value because we identify with the known.
Next, we have a question from Hareshwar Singh. Can we say that valuing what I have now amounts to living with gratitude?
It may express itself in that way. You count your blessings, as they say. You are thankful to life for what you have received and not complaining about what you have not received. It's a form of contentment which requires a certain sensitivity. See, if I enjoy my bicycle ride, I don't feel jealous of the man who goes in my neighbor who goes in a Mercedes, because I'm quite happy going with my bicycle ride, and my bicycle ride doesn't become worse because he goes in a Mercedes. So the mind creates this division that he is having this and he is able to go fast and so on. And so it feels that I don't have enough. We all have an infinity. When you have health, when you are going for a walk in the morning and nothing is disturbing your thoughts, there is so much joy we experience. That joy is happiness. But we have given tremendous value to achievement. What have you achieved? What have you become? That's what the society asks. And that propaganda of society traps you, takes you away from this natural joy of just being friends, just playing a game, just enjoying, playing with a child even. Have you not noticed that when you watch Krishnaji's videos, he talks to the school child with the same enthusiasm and passion as when he talks to David Bohm. The mind is not measuring, not creating high and low, not saying, what does this little boy know? That man is a great scientist. All that kind of thinking is what our mind does. He's not affected by that. He is enthusiastic about what he is doing, and he is doing it for the love of it. That's how I notice. And that's what he's saying, that is the way to live. So we get misdirected in our education. And perhaps in one of future talks, we'll discuss that, the role of education. Because right now, education as it is structured is promoting ambition, promoting the ego, promoting the sense of achievement and competition. And Krishna says that is destroying the world. That's why he wanted to change education, bring up children differently so that they grow up as sensitive human beings, not bored human beings all the time seeking pleasure and entertainment.
We have a question from Hari Naidu. What is real intelligence?
Different people define it differently, but I just explained the sense in which Krishnaji uses it. Since to him, the most important thing in life is to free the mind of all this propaganda and illusion of society in which we are trapped. Because he says, without freedom from your conditioning, you have no basis for thought. Your thought is colored by all these values which have been put there, and you have unquestioningly accepted them, and you are imitating in your life to live accordingly, obeying them. So he's asking us to revolt against it, not violent revolt, but this intelligent revolt, which is not accepting tradition. Not fighting against it, not being violent, not hating tradition, but not accepting tradition blindly. And all this is tradition. The way you grow up in society, what society tells you is a good life, all that is your tradition. Your conditioning is your tradition.
We have a few questions from Kapil. Does observation, choiceless awareness, bring energy to the mind and body?
Yes, if you are able to end the illusions in your mind, the energy that goes into the disorder, fighting the disorder, the conflict that arises from the illusions, is saved. And therefore there is less friction, less wastage of energy. Ultimately, energy is there in all of us. It's the same energy. You put it into a particular direction which you call achievement, ambition, and so on, usually in the direction of your profession. And therefore, you have less energy in other directions. But if you don't do that, there is energy. If you love everything that you do it with love, with enthusiasm. If you love every aspect of life, meaning you enjoy that, what you are doing, and you enjoy. There is nothing wrong with enjoyment, but in seeking enjoyment brings in the seeker, the ego. If you are not seeking it, there is great enjoyment in every activity in life.
And I will read the next question. I'm not sure if it has been answered, at least partially. Krishna ji said we need tremendous energy for observation. How do we get such energy?
Yeah, I just pointed out that we dissipate our energy through friction, through conflict, both inner conflict, which we talked about today, and outer conflict, which is so visible in the world. We dissipate our energy. So if that energy is not dissipated, it is there, available to us. We are aware only of the energy that comes from the ego. You have to discover the energy that is not from the ego. That's the energy of love. But because we have given tremendous importance to the ego process, to the achievement, to the ambition, to name, fame, and etc. Therefore, the love disappears. The energy of love is crushed. So there is a dialogue between Krishna ji and Scott Forbes, who was made the principal of Rockwood by Krishna ji sometime in the 1970s. He says to Scott, is Scott aware that the seed of intelligence is there in him? The seed of intelligence is there in him. He has nothing to do with it. It takes its own course and has its own flowering. but he can kill it. What he said to Scott applies to each one of us. The seed of intelligence is there in each one of us. We kill it with our ambition, with our ego, and so on, because we have not understood the process of ourselves. That is the reason it is necessary for every human being to engage with self-knowledge. And that's why it should be part of education, so that every child is acquainted with these problems and how they arise. That's intelligence. That's the awakening of intelligence. But without self-knowledge, there is no intelligence. You're just blindly hurtling through with the propaganda in which your mind is caught. And you think your propaganda is superior to the other man's propaganda. It is not. This propaganda is propaganda. One lie is not superior to another lie.
And now the next question. If we are not interested and passionate about our office work, then how could we observe, listen in the office? And without interest, is our energy wasted?
You have to ask that question right in the beginning. Whether you choose that profession because of the rewards it offers, or did you choose that profession because that's what you love to do? Krishnaji is saying, don't go after the reward. Because if you are not really interested in that work, that activity, you will be bored, you will be tired, and you can see what it is in humanity and around us. They work for 5 days in the week in order to relax over the weekend. And on the weekend, they drink, they go to the seaside, they take a girl with them and get pleasure and so on in order to overcome the boredom and the tiredness of the 5 days. So we have divided work from pleasure. Krishna says that's a totally nonsensical way of living. Every day should be a joy. You need to approach every day afresh and new. But that's only possible if you have chosen your profession because that's what you love to do. Not because that gets you more money, just because you have more ability in that and so on. So success is mediocrity. Success as we right now define it is mediocrity. So where the Jesus Christ and the Buddha and Socrates looking for success, we admire these people. We worship them. We call them saints. Do we learn from their life? They were not concerned about success. They were doing what they love to do.
And now the last question from this series. How could we be aware during the daily routine activities?
During the daily routine of?
Activities.
Yeah. Because the awareness is the second bird. We talked about these two birds on a tree. That's a metaphor for our consciousness having both the ego consciousness and the capacity for awareness. And the wisdom comes from the second bird. So the problem is not what activity you are engaged in, but whether you are learning from the second bird, which is the watching. You can watch your consciousness as it operates in that activity. You may be working in a bank, in a factory, in the army, but whatever work you are doing, can you watch why you are doing that and what motivation is acting behind that, and the whole effect of that, how it comes about, what it does to your life and your consciousness, and how it ends, what are the consequences of approaching life that way. We have just pointed out some of the consequences of approaching life egoistic.
Now we have a couple of questions from Ravi. What is the total process?
This whole process that we are discussing is the total process in our consciousness. Everything that takes place in the consciousness is part of that total process. But we have not been trained to watch this process with a learning mind. And Krishnaji is saying, you need to do that. You need to learn about yourself through watching, not through books, not through other people's opinion, not from your guru, but by actually watching what goes on. Because you are the subject. So you are the teacher, you are the objective, and you are the student. Have you studied yourself? Studied in this way, like you study mathematics or physics or whatever. Have you studied yourself in that way? That will improve your understanding, and you will see what is false and what is true. But we have not been trained. We have been trained in the field of knowledge, ability, techniques. There is no technique in this. This ability is completely different from that ability or skill. Which you cultivate.
And the second question is, what is the tool to self-knowledge?
What is the tool?
Yeah, that's the question. What is the tool to self-knowledge? And maybe what that means is the method, or...
Sir, if I might point out with great humility, and they have not been listening to these talks. All the time we have been talking about self-knowledge and how you come upon self-knowledge. And after the whole of Ramayana is over, you are asking who was Sita? Study it, sir, study it. Don't wait for me to answer that question. And don't accept my answers anyway.
So next we have questions from Chandra. Generally, belief comes when one is helpless and looks for an anchor to hold on to. Is someone's feeling helpless, despair, part of the ego?
It is one of the consequences of approaching life egoistically. See, At any given moment, there are some things I have and some other things I don't have. Either I pay attention to what I have, which as I said is as an infinity if you are sensitive, or I cry over what I didn't get, what I don't have, because maybe my neighbor has that or my brother has that. So the mind creates this process. Ask yourself the following question. How does the mind answer the question whether one is fortunate or one is unfortunate in life? I mean, what you have is like the number 50. Is the number 50 high or low? Number 50 is number 50. It's more than 49 and less than 51. So if you compare, then it becomes less or it becomes more. If you don't compare, then it's neither less nor more. It is what it is. So the sense of depression comes because you compare and you feel you don't have what somebody else has or what your ideal or aim was, and you didn't achieve it. That's all. That whole thing of comparison, of measurement, is part of the ego process. So you have to ask this deeper question: why am I measuring? Why am I comparing? Why do I feel that what I have is insufficient? Ask that question, sir, and probe it deeply. Don't just answer it verbally. Don't just argue about it. Watch it.
And now we have a related question. What does one do when they feel helpless but are not caught in the trap of belief?
Why do I need help? Why can't I stand on my own legs and manage my life for myself? You need help because you feel you don't know what to do, and you want somebody else to tell you what to do. So find out why you have not learned. You have not cared, you have not paid attention. I shared one text with you a few weeks ago, where somebody said to Krishnaji that I've been listening to your talks for several years now, and no change has come about. Read that. He says, it's our responsibility to learn. You won't learn just by listening to him. Let me see if I can find that passage on my screen and read it to you once more. It's a very beautiful passage. Can you see it on your screen?
Yes.
So Krishnamurti repeats the question. I have been listening for some years to your talks and no change has come about in me. He says, then don't listen anymore. Now look, sir, if you listen to somebody for years and you see for yourself the beauty of what is being said, then you want to listen more. Then it opens doors to you, which you have never seen before. But if it doesn't, then what is wrong? What is wrong with the speaker who says these things, or what is wrong with the listener? Why is it that a man or a woman who has heard the speaker for many years is not changed? In that there is great sorrow, is there not? You see a flower. You see a flower, a lovely flower by the wayside. You glance and pass by. You don't stop to look. You don't see the beauty, the quiet dignity, the loveliness. You pass by. What is wrong? Is it that you are not serious? Is it that you don't care? Is it that you have so many problems that you are caught up in them? No time, no leisure to stop, so that you never look at that flower? Or is it that what the speaker is saying has no value in itself? Not what you think about it, but in itself it has no value. Has it no value? To determine whether it has or not, you have to investigate what the speaker is saying. And to investigate, you must have the capacity to listen. You must be able to look. You must give your time to it. So it's your responsibility, or is it the responsibility of the speaker? It is our mutual responsibility, is it not? Both of us have to look. The speaker may point out, but you have to look. You have to go into it. You have to learn. And if your mind is not diligent, but negligent, if your mind is not watching, highly sensitive, it is your doing. That means you have to change your ways of life. Everything has to be changed to learn a way of living which is entirely different. And that demands energy. You cannot be lazy, indolent. So since it is our mutual responsibility, maybe more yours than that of the speaker. Perhaps, sir, you have not given your life to it. We are talking about life, not about ideas, not about theories, practices, not even techniques, but to look at this whole life, which is your life, and to care for it. And that means not to waste your life. You have a very short time to live, maybe 10, maybe 50 years, but don't waste it. Look at it. Give your life to understand. So he is basically pointing out that we have not engaged. We may have engaged with trying to understand his teaching, but the subject matter is not his teaching. The subject matter is our life, our consciousness. You have to give time to engage with your own consciousness, observe it, the teaching is meant only to assist you, give you questions to investigate so that you can learn. But the learning is not simply intellectual learning. It is learning through observing in your daily life how your consciousness is operating. All right, sir. I think it's time to end it here. And maybe this is a good passage to end it on. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very
And
much.
we'll go into how this whole ego process begins and what we can do to end it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, sirs.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you.